The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty corral as Maya Rodriguez stepped out of her beat-up pickup truck. At 4 feet 11 inches, she had to stretch to reach the tailgate, her boots barely touching the ground as she pulled out her worn leather saddlebags. The other ranch hands were already gathered around the coffee pot, their voices carrying across the yard in the crisp Wyoming air. "Well, I'll be damned," chuckled Buck Morrison, a tall, lanky cowboy with 20 years under his belt. "Looks like we got ourselves a new hand, boys. Hope she brought a stepladder." The laughter that followed was loud and crude, echoing off the barn walls. Maya's jaw tightened, but she kept her expression neutral. She'd heard it all before in rodeo arenas, at cattle auctions, and at every ranch job she'd ever applied for. Being a woman in ranching was hard enough. Being a short woman made it nearly impossible. "I heard old Thompson hired her sight unseen," added Jake Stevens, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. "Probably figured he was getting a bargain on wages." From the shadows of the barn, Ezra Hawthorne watched the scene unfold. At 62, the head rancher had seen his share of cowboys come and go. His weathered face remained impassive, but his pale blue eyes tracked every movement, every gesture. He noticed how Maya's shoulders squared despite the mockery, how her hands moved with practiced efficiency as she sorted through her gear. The Silver Creek Ranch sprawled across 15,000 acres of high desert, where the work was unforgiving and the landscape could break a person's spirit as easily as their back. Ezra had built his reputation on reading cattle, reading weather, and most importantly, reading people. The laughing cowboys saw only Maya's height, or lack thereof. Ezra saw something else entirely. "Rodriguez!" he called out, his voice cutting through the morning air like a blade. The laughter died immediately. "You're with me today." Maya shouldered her saddlebags and walked toward him, her stride confident despite having to take 2 steps for every one of his. "Yes, sir. We're checking the north pasture. Heard tell there might be some strays up in the breaks." The north pasture was notorious among the ranch hands, a maze of rocky outcroppings, steep ravines, and thorny brush that could tear a man's clothes to shreds and leave him lost for days. It was the kind of terrain that demanded respect, skill, and an almost supernatural ability to read the land. As they saddled their horses, Ezra watched Maya work. Her movements were economical, purposeful. She didn't waste energy trying to prove herself. She simply did what needed to be done. Her horse, a spirited paint named Cisco, stood perfectly still as she adjusted the cinch and checked the bridle. "You ride much?" Ezra asked, his tone neutral. "Since I was 3, Maya replied, swinging into the saddle with a fluid motion that spoke of years in the saddle. "My grandfather raised cattle in New Mexico. Small operation, but he taught me everything he knew before he passed." They rode out in comfortable silence, the sound of hoofbeats and creaking leather the only conversation between them. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of sage and the distant promise of rain. As they climbed higher into the hills, the terrain grew more challenging, forcing them to navigate narrow trails and steep switchbacks. It was Maya who spotted the first sign of trouble, a section of fence that had been damaged by a fallen tree. The wire was twisted and broken, creating a gap large enough for cattle to wander through into the wilderness beyond. "There," she pointed, her sharp eyes catching details that others might miss. "Fresh tracks heading north. Looks like maybe 6 or 7 head." Ezra studied the ground, noting the depth of the hoof prints and the scattered droppings. "Good eye. They've got maybe a 2-hour head start." The chase that followed tested every skill Maya had learned in her 26 years. The cattle had wandered deep into a canyon system, following game trails that barely qualified as paths. The terrain was treacherous, loose shale that could send a horse tumbling, overhanging rocks that forced riders to duck low in their saddles, and thorny brush that grabbed at clothing and exposed skin. While a larger rider might have struggled with the low-hanging branches and narrow passages, Maya moved through the landscape like water flowing around stones. Her compact frame was an advantage here, allowing her to navigate spaces that would have been impossible for someone taller. She ducked under branches that would have unseated another rider, squeezed through gaps in the rock that others couldn't have attempted. "There," she called softly, pointing to a cluster of red and black shapes huddled in a small clearing below. 7 head, just like the track said. The cattle were nervous, their eyes rolling white as they caught the scent of humans. They'd been spooked by something, maybe a coyote or a mountain lion, and were ready to bolt at the first sign of trouble. Getting them back to the ranch would require patience, skill, and perfect timing. "We'll need to work them slow," Ezra said, studying the terrain. "One wrong move and they'll scatter to hell and back. Maya nodded, already planning her approach. She'd learned long ago that being small meant being smarter, being more precise. While other cowboys relied on brute force and intimidation, she'd developed a more subtle approach, reading the animals' body language and working with their natural instincts rather than against them. The next hour was a masterclass in cattle psychology. Maya positioned herself at key points, using pressure and release to guide the nervous animals toward the trail home. She never pushed too hard, never created more stress than necessary. When one young bull tried to break away, she was there to turn him back, her horse responding to the slightest touch of her heels. Ezra watched it all with growing admiration. He'd seen plenty of cowboys who could muscle cattle around, but few who could read them like Maya did. She anticipated their moves, understood their fears, and worked with them rather than against them. "Where'd you learn to read cattle like that?" he asked, as they finally got the small herd moving in the right direction. "My grandfather used to say that cattle are just scared creatures looking for a reason to trust you," Maya replied, keeping her voice low to avoid spooking the animals. "Most people try to dominate them, but that just makes them more afraid. You have to show them you're not a threat, that you're just there to help them find their way home." The wisdom in her words struck Ezra deeply. In his 6 decades of ranching, he'd seen countless cowboys come and go. The ones who lasted weren't necessarily the biggest or the strongest. They were the ones who understood that successful ranching was about partnership, not domination. As they drove the cattle back toward the ranch, Maya continued to demonstrate skills that had nothing to do with her height. She spotted a lame heifer that needed attention, identified a section of fence that would need repair, and even noticed storm clouds gathering on the horizon that others might have missed. "Rain's coming," she said, nodding toward the darkening sky. "We should pick up the pace." The storm hit just as they reached the home pasture, sending the recovered cattle gratefully toward the shelter of the barn. Rain pelted down in sheets, turning the dusty ground to mud and sending the other ranch hands scurrying for cover. Maya never flinched, continuing to work until every animal was safely accounted for. By the time they'd finished, both riders were soaked to the skin, their clothes clinging to them like a second skin. Maya's hair had escaped from under her hat, hanging in wet strands around her face, but her eyes still held that steady determination that had impressed Ezra from the start. "Good work today," he said simply, his highest form of praise. Maya nodded, accepting the compliment without false modesty. "Thank you, sir. I appreciate the chance to prove myself." As she walked toward the bunkhouse to change into dry clothes, Ezra remained in the barn, grooming his horse and thinking about what he'd witnessed. The other hands were already gathering for dinner, their voices carrying across the yard as they shared stories and complaints about the day's work. "How'd the new girl do?" Buck called out as Ezra entered the main house. "She'll do," Ezra replied, his tone giving nothing away, but privately he was already planning to give Maya more responsibility. In a world where so many people judged based on appearances, he'd learned to look deeper. Maya Rodriguez might be short in stature, but she was tall in the qualities that really mattered: intelligence, skill, determination, and that rare ability to see the world through different eyes. The next morning brought fresh challenges and new opportunities for Maya to prove herself. Word had spread through the valley about a string of cattle rustling, and several ranchers had banded together to organize patrols. When the meeting was called, Maya found herself surrounded by men who towered over her, their voices loud and their plans aggressive. "We need to show these rustlers we mean business," declared Tom Harrison, owner of the neighboring Bar H Ranch. "Ride hard, cover ground, make our presence known." Ezra listened to the plans being made, his weathered face thoughtful. When the others had finished laying out their strategy, he spoke up quietly. "Maya here knows tracking better than most," he said, his simple statement carrying weight. "She's got eyes that see things others miss." The room fell silent. Several of the ranchers looked skeptical, their gazes taking in Maya's small frame with obvious doubt, but Ezra's reputation commanded respect, and his endorsement meant something. "With respect, Ezra," Tom said carefully, "this is dangerous work. We're dealing with armed men who won't hesitate to shoot." "Danger doesn't care how tall you are," Maya replied evenly. "But tracking stolen cattle requires patience and skill, not size." Over the following weeks, Maya proved her worth time and again. While other patrols thundered across the landscape, leaving obvious trails and spooking livestock, she moved like a ghost through the high country. Her small stature allowed her to remain hidden, observing from positions that would have been impossible for larger riders. It was Maya who finally spotted the rustlers' camp, hidden in a box canyon 20 miles from the nearest road. Her detailed intelligence allowed the combined ranchers to plan a successful operation that recovered over 100 head of stolen cattle and led to the arrest of the rustling ring. The success changed everything. The laughter that had greeted Maya's arrival was replaced by respect and then by genuine admiration. She became known throughout the valley as one of the finest trackers and cattle handlers anyone had ever seen, but perhaps the greatest recognition came from Ezra himself. 6 months after Maya's arrival, he called her into his office and offered her the position of assistant foreman, a role that would make her second in command of the entire operation. "I've watched a lot of cowboys come and go," he told her, his pale blue eyes serious. "Most of them were bigger than you, stronger than you, louder than you, but none of them had what you have." "What's that?" Maya asked. "The ability to see what others miss," Ezra replied. "In cattle, in land, in people. That's not something you can teach, and it's not something that has anything to do with how tall you stand." As Maya accepted the position, she thought about her grandfather's words from so many years ago. He'd told her that strength wasn't about size or volume. It was about understanding, patience, and the wisdom to know when to push and when to yield. The other ranch hands might have seen her height as a limitation, but Maya had learned to see it as an advantage. In a world that often rewarded the biggest and loudest, she'd found her place by being observant, precise, and unshakable in her quiet confidence. And in Ezra Hawthorne, she'd found someone who understood that true strength came not from physical stature, but from the size of one's character and the depth of one's determination. In the end, that was the only measurement that truly mattered. Winter came early to the Silver Creek Ranch that year, sweeping down from the mountains with a ferocity that caught even the most experienced hands off guard. By November, snow had already begun to accumulate in the high pastures, and the weather reports promised a brutal season ahead. It was during these harsh months that Maya Rodriguez would face her greatest test yet, not just as a ranch hand, but as the newly appointed assistant foreman. The first crisis came on a Tuesday morning when the temperature had dropped to 20 below zero. Maya was reviewing feed schedules in the ranch office when Jimmy Patterson, one of the newer hands, burst through the door with panic written across his face. "Miss Rodriguez, we got a problem," he gasped, still out of breath from running. "The Miller Creek pasture. The fence is down and we can't find near 30 head of cattle." Maya's blood ran cold. Miller Creek bordered the national forest, and cattle lost in that wilderness during winter rarely survived. The terrain was unforgiving even in good weather, with steep ravines and dense timber that could hide a herd indefinitely. In a blizzard, it became a death trap. "When did you last see them?" Maya asked, already reaching for her heavy coat. "Yesterday evening. Jake was supposed to check the fence line, but with the storm coming in..." Jimmy's voice trailed off, the implication clear. Maya found Ezra in the barn, methodically checking the emergency supplies. His weathered face was grave as he listened to her report. 30 head, he repeated slowly. "That's near $50,000 walking around out there, assuming they're still walking." "I'll take a crew and head out immediately," Maya said. "We can track them even in this weather if we move fast." Ezra studied her for a long moment. "It's not just about the cattle, Maya. You send the wrong people out there, and you'll be looking for bodies come spring. The old-timers are saying this storm could last 3 days. Maya understood the weight of his words. As assistant foreman, the decision of who to send and where to send them was hers to make. One wrong choice could cost lives, both human and animal. "Buck Morrison and Carlos Valdez," she said after a moment's consideration. "They know the Miller Creek country better than anyone. And I'll take Tommy Chen. He's young, but he's got good instincts." "And yourself?" Ezra asked. "Someone has to lead them," Maya replied simply. The look that passed between them spoke volumes. Ezra had spent his life making hard decisions, sending people into danger when circumstances demanded it. But this was Maya's first real test as a leader, and they both knew it. "Take the GPS units," Ezra said finally, "and the emergency shelter. If this storm turns worse, don't try to be a hero. Find cover and wait it out." Maya nodded, but they both knew that with 30 head of cattle wandering loose in a blizzard, heroics might be the only option. The search party assembled quickly, the experienced hands moving with the quiet efficiency of men who understood the stakes. Buck Morrison, despite his earlier skepticism about Maya's abilities, had grown to respect her judgment over the past months. Carlos Valdez, a quiet Mexican cowboy with 30 years of experience, simply nodded when Maya explained the plan. Tommy Chen, barely 20 and eager to prove himself, checked and rechecked his gear with nervous energy. This would be his first real emergency, and Maya could see the mixture of excitement and fear in his eyes. "Listen up," Maya addressed the group as they prepared to mount up. "We're not just looking for cattle out there. We're looking for signs, tracks, broken branches, anything that tells us which way they went. The snow's been falling for 6 hours, so the trail's going to be faint." She paused, making eye contact with each man. "If anyone gets separated, you stop where you are and wait for help. This isn't the time for individual heroics. We work together, or we don't work at all." The wind hit them like a physical blow as they rode out of the ranch yard. The snow was coming down so thick that visibility was limited to maybe 50 yards. Maya pulled her scarf up over her face and urged her horse forward, following the fence line toward Miller Creek. The damaged fence was easy to spot. A section nearly 100 feet long had been flattened by a fallen tree, creating a highway for the cattle to wander into the forest. Maya dismounted and studied the ground, her trained eye picking out details that others might miss. "Here," she called out, pointing to a depression in the snow. "Fresh tracks heading northeast toward the creek bottom." Buck squinted at the marks, barely visible in the swirling snow. "You sure about that? Looks like just wind patterns to me." Maya knelt down, brushing away the loose snow to reveal the unmistakable shape of a hoof print. 30 head make a lot of tracks, even in this weather. They're maybe 2 hours ahead of us. The pursuit that followed was a masterclass in winter tracking. Maya led the way, reading the landscape like a book written in snow and shadow. She spotted places where the cattle had stopped to shelter, noted the direction of their movement, and gradually pieced together the story of their wandering. Her small stature once again proved to be an advantage. While the other riders struggled with low-hanging branches heavy with snow, Maya could duck under obstacles that would have knocked a taller person from their saddle. She moved through the forest like a ghost, her horse picking its way carefully through the treacherous terrain. "There," Carlos called out, pointing to a dark shape barely visible through the trees. "I see something." Maya rode closer, her heart sinking as she recognized the outline of a cow lying motionless in the snow. The animal was still alive, but barely, shivering uncontrollably and too weak to stand. "Hypothermia," she diagnosed quickly. "We need to get her warmed up and moving, or she's not going to make it." Working together, the 4 riders managed to get the cow back on her feet. It was exhausting work in the bitter cold, but Maya's determination kept them going. She knew that if they could save this one animal, it might give them the strength to save the rest. As they continued deeper into the forest, the storm intensified. The wind howled through the trees with increasing fury, and the temperature continued to drop. Maya's hands were numb inside her gloves, and ice crystals formed on her eyelashes, but she pressed on. "Miss Rodriguez," Tommy called out, his voice tight with concern. "I think we're pushing too hard. Maybe we should turn back." Maya looked at the young cowboy, seeing her own fears reflected in his eyes. The smart thing to do would be to retreat to the ranch and wait out the storm. But she also knew that 30 head of cattle wouldn't survive 3 days in this weather. "We find them," she said firmly. "All of them." It was Buck who spotted the main herd, huddled together in a small clearing beside the frozen creek. The cattle were in bad shape, cold, hungry, and disoriented. Several of the calves were showing signs of severe hypothermia, their breathing shallow and their movement sluggish. "Jesus," Buck muttered, surveying the scene. "How the hell are we going to get them all back in this storm?" Maya studied the situation, her mind working quickly. The direct route back to the ranch would take them through the worst of the weather, but there was another way, a longer path that would provide more shelter, but would require them to cross the creek at its narrowest point. "We go around," she decided. "Follow the creek bed south for about a mile, then cross at the old logging bridge. It'll take longer, but we'll have more protection from the wind." "That bridge has been out for years," Carlos pointed out. "Creek's frozen now, but the ice might not hold 30 head of cattle." Maya nodded, acknowledging the risk. "Then we test it first. Cross them in small groups. Make sure the ice can handle the weight." The next 3 hours were among the most challenging of Maya's life. Getting the cattle moving in the storm was like trying to herd shadows. They were confused, frightened, and reluctant to leave even the minimal shelter they'd found. Several times, animals tried to break away from the group, forcing the riders to chase them down in the blinding snow. Maya's leadership skills were tested at every turn. She had to make split-second decisions about which route to take, how to handle injured animals, and when to push forward versus when to rest. Her 3 companions looked to her for guidance, and she couldn't afford to show any uncertainty or doubt. The crossing at the old logging bridge was the most dangerous part of the journey. Maya went first, testing the ice carefully with her horse's hooves. The surface held, but she could hear ominous creaking sounds that made her stomach clench with anxiety. 5 at a time, she called back to the others. Move them slow and steady. If the ice starts to crack, get them back to solid ground immediately. One by one, small groups of cattle were coaxed across the frozen creek. Maya's heart pounded with each crossing, knowing that a single misstep could send animals plunging through the ice into the deadly water below. But her careful planning paid off. Every animal made it safely to the other side. The final mile back to the ranch was a blur of snow and exhaustion. Maya's horse was struggling now, its breath coming in harsh gasps that created clouds of steam in the frigid air. She could feel her own strength ebbing, but she forced herself to stay alert, to keep counting heads, to make sure no animal was left behind. When the lights of the ranch finally appeared through the storm, Maya felt a surge of relief so intense it nearly brought tears to her eyes. The cattle, sensing safety, picked up their pace, eager to reach the warmth of the barn and the promise of food and shelter. Ezra was waiting for them in the ranch yard, his weathered face showing both relief and pride as he counted the returning cattle. 30 head, he announced, every last one accounted for. Maya slumped in her saddle, the adrenaline that had kept her going finally beginning to fade. Her hands were so numb she could barely hold the reins, and her legs felt like rubber as she dismounted. Good work, Ezra said simply, but the respect in his voice was unmistakable. You brought them all home. As the cattle were settled in the barn and the horses were rubbed down and fed, Maya found herself surrounded by the other ranch hands. The men who had once laughed at her height now looked at her with something approaching awe. Hell of a thing, Buck said, shaking his head. I've been doing this for 20 years and I've never seen anyone track like that in a blizzard. The way you handled that ice crossing, Carlos added, that took real nerve. Even Tommy, despite his exhaustion, was animated with excitement. When we get back out there in the spring, I want to learn how to read tracks like you do, Miss Rodriguez. That was incredible. Maya accepted their praise with quiet dignity, but privately she was already thinking about the lessons learned. The storm had tested not just her tracking skills, but her leadership abilities, her decision-making under pressure, and her willingness to take calculated risks when lives were on the line. Later that evening, as the storm continued to rage outside, Maya sat in the ranch office completing her report. Every detail needed to be documented. The condition of the fence, the location where the cattle were found, the route taken back to the ranch, and the overall condition of the animals. Ezra knocked on the doorframe and entered without waiting for permission. How are you feeling? He asked, settling into the chair across from her desk. Tired, Maya admitted, but good. We didn't lose a single animal. That's not what I meant, Ezra said quietly. Today was your first real test as a leader. How do you feel about the decisions you made? Maya considered the question carefully. I think I made the right calls, she said finally. The route we took was longer, but it was safer. The creek crossing was risky, but it was a calculated risk, and we got results. Ezra nodded approvingly. Leadership isn't about never making mistakes, he said. It's about making the best decisions you can with the information you have, and then living with the consequences. I understand that now, Maya replied. When I was just a ranch hand, I only had to worry about myself and my horse. But today I had 3 men and 30 head of cattle depending on my judgment. That's a different kind of responsibility. And how did it feel? Ezra asked. Maya thought about the question, remembering the weight of those decisions, the fear of making the wrong choice, and the satisfaction of bringing everyone home safely. Heavy, she said finally, but right. Like this is what I was meant to do. Ezra smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him in months. Then you're ready for what comes next, he said, because this was just the beginning. As Maya finished her report and prepared to head to the bunkhouse, she reflected on how much had changed since her first day at the Silver Creek Ranch. The men who had once mocked her height now looked to her for leadership. The skills that had once seemed like limitations, her ability to move quietly, to observe carefully, to think before acting, had become her greatest strengths. The storm outside showed no signs of abating, and Maya knew that the winter ahead would bring more challenges, more tests of her abilities and her resolve. But for the first time since arriving at the ranch, she felt truly confident in her role. She was no longer just trying to prove herself. She was leading others, making decisions that mattered, and taking responsibility for the lives and livelihoods of everyone around her. The laughter that had greeted her arrival seemed like a distant memory now, replaced by the quiet respect of people who had seen her work and recognized her worth. As she stepped out into the storm to make her way to the bunkhouse, Maya thought about her grandfather's words once again. He told her that strength wasn't about size, but about character. Today she'd proven that lesson not just to herself, but to everyone who had ever doubted her. The snow continued to fall, blanketing the ranch in pristine white, but Maya walked through it with her head held high. She was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do. And tomorrow, when the storm finally broke, she'd be ready for whatever challenges came next. Spring arrived at the Silver Creek Ranch with a burst of wildflowers and the sound of newborn calves calling for their mothers. Maya had settled comfortably into her role as assistant foreman, her authority now unquestioned among the ranch hands. The brutal winter had forged her into a leader, and even the most skeptical cowboys had come to respect her judgment. But on a warm May morning, a new challenge arrived in the form of a sleek black sedan that looked distinctly out of place among the pickup trucks and horse trailers. Maya watched from the barn as three figures emerged from the vehicle, two men in expensive suits and a woman in a tailored blazer that probably cost more than most ranch hands made in a month. Corporate types, muttered Buck Morrison, spitting into the dust. Never seen good come from their kind showing up. Ezra emerged from the ranch house to greet the visitors, his weathered face carefully neutral. Maya could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched slightly at his sides. Whatever this was about, it wasn't good news. The meeting lasted 2 hours. Maya tried to focus on her work, but she couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was being discussed in that house would change everything. When the corporate delegation finally left, Ezra stood on the porch for a long time, staring out at the mountains. "Staff meeting," he announced finally. "Main house, 30 minutes. The ranch hands gathered in Ezra's living room, their faces reflecting the same unease Maya felt. Ezra stood before them, his pale blue eyes serious as he surveyed the group. "That was Consolidated Western Holdings," he began without preamble. "They're interested in buying the Silver Creek Ranch." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Several of the hands shifted uncomfortably, and Maya felt her stomach drop. The Silver Creek Ranch had been in Ezra's family for 4 generations. It was more than just a business. It was a legacy. "They're offering good money," Ezra continued, his voice carefully controlled. "More than the ranch is worth on paper, but they're not interested in continuing the cattle operation. They want to develop the land, vacation homes, golf courses, maybe a resort." "What did you tell them?" Maya asked, though she dreaded the answer. "I told them I'd think about it," Ezra replied. "I'm 62 years old, and I don't have any children to pass this on to. The offer they made would set me up for a comfortable retirement." The silence that followed was deafening. These men had devoted their lives to this land, to these cattle, to the way of life that ranching represented. The thought of seeing it all bulldozed for vacation homes was almost unbearable. "There's got to be another way," Maya said finally. "Some option that doesn't involve selling to developers." Ezra's eyes met hers, and she saw something there, a flicker of hope, maybe, or desperation. "The ranch has been struggling financially for years," he admitted. "Cattle prices are down, feed costs are up, and we're barely breaking even. Without some major changes, we'll be forced to sell eventually anyway." "What kind of changes?" Carlos asked. "That's what I've been thinking about," Ezra said, "and I think Maya might have the answer." All eyes turned to Maya, who felt suddenly self-conscious under the scrutiny. "I'm not sure I understand." "You've got vision," Ezra said simply. "You see things others miss. If there's a way to save this ranch, to make it profitable again, you're the one who'll figure it out." The weight of his words settled on Maya's shoulders like a heavy blanket. The fate of the Silver Creek Ranch, the jobs of a dozen good men, and the preservation of a way of life that was rapidly disappearing, all of it rested on her ability to find a solution that had eluded everyone else. "Give me a week," she said finally. "Let me look at the books, study the operation, and see what I can come up with." Ezra nodded. 1 week. Then I have to give Consolidated Western an answer." That evening, Maya spread the ranch's financial records across her desk, studying columns of numbers that painted a grim picture. The ranch was indeed losing money, not dramatically but steadily, like a slow leak that would eventually sink the ship. Feed costs had risen 30% over the past 5 years, while cattle prices had remained flat. The math was simple and unforgiving, but as Maya dug deeper into the records, she began to see patterns that others might have missed. The ranch's purebred Angus cattle were consistently scoring higher than average at market, commanding premium prices. The hay operation was actually profitable, producing more than the ranch needed for its own cattle. And the location, just 2 hours from Denver and an hour from several ski resorts, was potentially valuable in ways that pure cattle ranching couldn't capture. An idea began to form in Maya's mind, vague at first but growing clearer as she worked through the possibilities. What if they didn't have to choose between ranching and development? What if there was a way to do both? The next morning, Maya requested a meeting with Ezra. She found him in the barn, methodically cleaning tack with the same precision he brought to everything else. "I've been thinking about diversification," she began without preamble. "What if we could generate additional revenue streams without compromising the core ranching operation?" Ezra looked up from the saddle he was cleaning. "What did you have in mind?" "Agri-tourism," Maya said, warming to her subject. "City people are fascinated by ranch life, but they don't know how to experience it authentically. We could offer weekend experiences, cattle drives, horse riding lessons, working ranch vacations. People would pay good money to learn what we do every day." "Turn the ranch into a dude ranch, you mean?" Ezra's tone was skeptical. "Not exactly," Maya clarified. "Keep it as a working ranch, but allow visitors to participate in the real work. No fake cowboy shows or artificial experiences. Let them help with actual ranch operations, checking cattle, mending fences, branding calves. They get an authentic experience, and we get additional revenue." Ezra was quiet for a long moment, considering the proposal. "It would change things," he said finally. "Having outsiders here, people who don't understand the work." "It would," Maya agreed, "but it might also save the ranch. And if we do it right, it could help preserve the ranching way of life by showing people why it matters." Over the following days, Maya threw herself into researching the agritourism industry. She studied successful operations in Colorado, Montana, and Wyoming, learning what worked and what didn't. She calculated potential revenue, estimated startup costs, and developed a comprehensive business plan. The key, she realized, was authenticity. Too many ranch tourism operations were essentially theme parks, offering sanitized versions of ranch life that bore little resemblance to the real thing. What Maya proposed was different. Genuine working ranch experiences that would educate visitors while generating revenue. "We'd need to make some infrastructure improvements," she explained to Ezra as they walked through the ranch buildings. "Guest quarters, maybe renovate the old foreman's house, a dining area for group meals, but the basic facilities are already here." "What about the hands?" Ezra asked. "Some of them might not take kindly to having their work turned into entertainment." Maya had thought about this too. "We'd need to be selective about who we work with. Find people who are comfortable teaching, who can share their knowledge without feeling like they're performing, and we'd pay them extra for the additional responsibilities." "And you think this could work?" Ezra asked. "I think it's our best shot," Maya replied honestly. "The numbers add up. There's definitely demand for authentic ranch experiences, and it allows us to keep doing what we love while making it financially sustainable." The presentation to Consolidated Western Holdings was scheduled for the following Friday. Maya spent the entire week refining her proposal, creating detailed financial projections and marketing strategies. She practiced her pitch until she could deliver it flawlessly, knowing that she would have only one chance to convince the suits that the ranch was worth more as a working operation than as a development project. When the day arrived, Maya found herself facing the same three corporate representatives who had visited the week before. They sat around Ezra's dining room table, their expensive suits and polished shoes completely out of place in the rustic setting. "Mr. Hawthorne has asked me to present an alternative proposal," Maya began, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "A plan that we believe offers better long-term value for all parties involved." She laid out her vision methodically, explaining how the ranch could become a destination for authentic agricultural tourism while maintaining its core cattle operation. She showed them the financial projections, the market research, the detailed implementation plan. "The initial investment would be minimal," she explained, "much less than what you'd spend on development infrastructure, and the ongoing revenue stream would be substantial. We're projecting a 30% increase in annual income within 3 years." The lead representative, a thin man named Harrison, looked skeptical. "Ms. Rodriguez, with all due respect, you're asking us to invest in a business model that's essentially unproven. Development, on the other hand, offers guaranteed returns." "Does it?" Maya challenged. "The vacation home market is already saturated in this area, and with environmental regulations getting stricter, development projects are facing increasing scrutiny. What we're proposing is sustainable, environmentally friendly, and economically viable." The woman who had introduced herself as Sarah Chen leaned forward. "Walk me through a typical guest experience. What exactly would they be doing?" Maya smiled, sensing an opportunity. They'd arrive on Sunday evening for a week-long stay. Monday morning, they'd join the hands for the daily cattle check, learning how to read the herd and identify potential problems. Tuesday, they'd help with fence repair and maintenance. Wednesday, they'd participate in moving cattle to new pastures. Thursday, they'd learn about ranch machinery and hay production. Friday, they'd help with veterinary care and record keeping. Saturday, they'd have a chance to put all their skills together in a full day of ranch work. And people would pay for this? Harrison asked. They'd pay handsomely, Maya replied. Our research shows that authentic agritourism experiences can command premium prices. We're talking about $2,500 per person per week, and we could accommodate 12 guests at a time. The numbers were compelling, and Maya could see the corporate representatives doing the math in their heads. Even allowing for overhead and operational costs, the profit margins were attractive. What about liability issues? Sarah asked. You're talking about having untrained civilians working with large animals and heavy machinery. We'd have comprehensive insurance and safety protocols, Maya replied. Every activity would be supervised by experienced hands, and we'd require all guests to sign detailed waivers and complete safety training before participating in any ranch work. The questions continued for another hour, but Maya was ready for all of them. She'd anticipated every concern, researched every potential problem, and developed solutions for every challenge. By the time she finished her presentation, she could see that she'd given the corporate team something to think about. We'll need to discuss this internally, Harrison said finally. It's certainly an interesting proposal, but it represents a significant departure from our usual business model. I understand, Maya replied, but I believe it represents the future of ranching. The old model, relying solely on cattle sales, simply isn't sustainable anymore. We need to adapt and innovate while preserving what makes this way of life special. After the corporate team left, Maya found herself alone with Ezra on the front porch. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Think they'll go for it? Ezra asked. I don't know, Maya admitted, but I think we gave them something to consider. The numbers are solid and the concept is sound. If they're smart, they'll see the potential. And if they don't? Maya was quiet for a moment, watching the cattle move slowly across the distant pasture. Then we find another way, she said finally. There are other investors, other financing options. This ranch is worth saving, and I'm not ready to give up on it. Ezra nodded, his weathered face thoughtful. You know, when I first hired you, I thought I was just getting another ranch hand, someone to help with the daily work. I never imagined you'd end up trying to save the whole operation. Neither did I, Maya replied honestly. But this place has become home to me. These people, this way of life, it's worth fighting for. Your grandfather would be proud, Ezra said quietly. He taught you well. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Maya felt a deep sense of purpose settle over her. Whether Consolidated Western accepted her proposal or not, she had proven something important to herself. She was no longer just a ranch hand trying to prove her worth. She was a leader, a visionary, someone capable of seeing solutions where others saw only problems. The laughter that had greeted her arrival at the Silver Creek Ranch now seemed like a lifetime ago. The woman who had stepped out of that beat-up pickup truck, enduring mockery about her height and her gender, had evolved into someone who commanded respect through her actions and her ideas. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, new opportunities to prove herself. But tonight, Maya Rodriguez sat on the porch of a ranch she had helped save, surrounded by the vast Wyoming sky and the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had found her place in the world. The corporate challenge had tested her in ways she never expected, forcing her to think beyond the day-to-day operations of ranching and consider the bigger picture of sustainability and survival. In rising to meet that challenge, she had discovered capabilities she never knew she possessed and affirmed her commitment to a way of life that was rapidly disappearing. Whatever the future held, Maya was ready for it. She had learned that true strength came not from physical stature or traditional expectations, but from the willingness to see possibilities where others saw only limitations. And in that knowledge, she had found not just success but purpose. 2 years after Maya's presentation to Consolidated Western Holdings, the Silver Creek Ranch had transformed into something unprecedented in the ranching world. The agritourism program had not only saved the ranch, but had become a model for sustainable agriculture that drew visitors from around the globe. Maya, now officially the ranch manager, stood in the newly constructed visitor center, watching the morning briefing for the week's guests. Remember, folks, she addressed the group of 12 urban professionals who had paid premium prices to experience authentic ranch life. This isn't a dude ranch vacation. You're here to learn real ranching skills and participate in genuine ranch work. By the end of the week, you'll understand what it takes to maintain this way of life. The transformation had been remarkable. The old foreman's house had been converted into comfortable guest quarters, the barn had been expanded to accommodate educational activities, and a new dining hall had been built, using reclaimed wood from the original homestead. But most importantly, the ranch had retained its authentic character while becoming financially sustainable. Maya's success had attracted attention from the agricultural community, ranching associations, and even universities studying sustainable farming practices. She had been invited to speak at conferences, consulted on similar projects, and featured in several industry publications. The girl who had once been mocked for her height was now recognized as a visionary leader in agricultural innovation. But success had also brought new challenges. On this particular morning, Maya faced what might be her greatest test yet, the arrival of Rebecca Sinclair, a documentary filmmaker who had come to create a film about the changing face of American ranching. "Ms. Rodriguez," Rebecca said, extending her hand as Maya approached. "I'm looking forward to understanding how you've managed to revolutionize this operation." Maya shook her hand, noting the filmmaker's intense gaze and the way she seemed to be already analyzing everything around her. "I appreciate your interest, but I think you might be overestimating my role. This has been a team effort from the beginning." "Has it, though?" Rebecca pressed. "From what I've researched, you're the one who developed the agritourism concept, convinced the investors, and managed the implementation. That sounds like leadership to me." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a familiar figure, Dr. James Morrison, a professor of agricultural economics from Colorado State University. Maya had worked with him on several sustainability studies, and his presence here could only mean one thing. "Maya," Dr. Morrison said, his expression serious, "we need to talk. There's something important I need to discuss with you." They walked to Maya's office, a modest space that reflected her practical approach to management. The walls were covered with charts showing cattle genetics, pasture rotation schedules, and visitor satisfaction ratings. A large window overlooked the main pasture, where the current group of agritourism guests were learning to work with the cattle under Buck Morrison's patient guidance. "I've been approached by the National Ranching Association," Dr. Morrison began without preamble. "They want to offer you a position as their Director of Innovation and Sustainability. It would mean leaving the Silver Creek Ranch, but it would also give you a platform to implement your ideas on a national scale." Maya felt her stomach drop. The Silver Creek Ranch had become more than just her workplace. It was her home, her life's work, her greatest achievement. The thought of leaving it behind was almost unbearable. "What exactly would the position involve?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "You'd be developing programs to help struggling ranchers across the country transition to sustainable models," Dr. Morrison explained. "Creating educational materials, consulting on individual operations, working with government agencies on policy initiatives. Essentially, you'd be doing what you've done here, but on a much larger scale. And if I turned it down, they'd find someone else," Dr. Morrison said simply. "But Maya, you have to understand, there are thousands of ranchers out there facing the same challenges the Silver Creek Ranch faced 2 years ago. You have the knowledge and experience to help them. The question is whether you're willing to step up to that responsibility." Maya stared out the window at the guests working with the cattle. One woman, a marketing executive from New York, was struggling to understand why a particular cow was refusing to move. Buck was patiently explaining cattle psychology, teaching her to read the animal's body language and work with its natural instincts rather than against them. "How long do I have to decide?" Maya asked. 2 weeks, Dr. Morrison replied. "They want to announce the appointment at the National Ranching Convention in Denver." After Dr. Morrison left, Maya found herself walking through the ranch, seeing it with new eyes. Every building, every improvement, every innovation bore the mark of her leadership. The visitor center where guests learned about sustainable ranching practices. The demonstration pastures where different grazing techniques were tested and refined. The educational barn where urban visitors learned to appreciate the complexity and skill required for successful ranching. She stopped at the memorial bench that had been installed near the original ranch house, dedicated to the memory of previous generations of ranchers who had worked this land. Ezra joined her there, his weathered face reflecting the same concerns that troubled her. "Heard about the job offer," he said simply. "Word travels fast around here," Maya replied. "It's a good opportunity," Ezra continued. "Chance to make a real difference on a national scale." It would mean leaving all this behind, Maya said, gesturing toward the ranch that had become her life's work. Would it, though? Ezra asked. Or would it mean taking what you've learned here and sharing it with others who need it? Maya was quiet for a long moment, processing his words. I built this place into something special, she said finally. I proved that sustainable ranching was possible, that tradition and innovation could coexist. But now they want me to leave it all behind and start over somewhere else. Maya, Ezra said gently, you didn't build this place to prove something to yourself. You built it to preserve a way of life that was disappearing. If you can help other ranches survive and thrive, isn't that the logical next step? That evening, Maya found herself in the dining hall sharing a meal with the week's guests. The conversation was lively, filled with questions about ranch management, cattle behavior, and the challenges of sustainable agriculture. She listened to their enthusiasm, their genuine desire to understand and appreciate the ranching way of life, and realized something important. What made you decide to do this? Asked Sarah Chen, the marketing executive who had struggled with the cattle earlier. I mean, transition from traditional ranching to this hybrid model. Maya considered the question carefully. I think it was realizing that preservation and progress don't have to be mutually exclusive, she said. The ranching way of life was disappearing because it couldn't adapt to changing economic realities. But instead of abandoning it, we found a way to make it sustainable by sharing it with others. But wasn't it risky? Asked another guest, a technology entrepreneur from Silicon Valley. I mean, you were essentially betting the entire ranch on an unproven concept. Everything worthwhile involves risk, Maya replied, but the greater risk was doing nothing and watching everything disappear. The conversation continued late into the evening, and Maya found herself energized by the guests' questions and observations. These people had come from completely different worlds, corporate boardrooms, tech startups, academic institutions, but they were all genuinely interested in understanding and preserving the ranching way of life. It was then that Maya realized what her decision had to be. The next morning, she called Dr. Morrison and accepted the position with the National Ranching Association. The conversation was brief but emotional. She would be leaving the Silver Creek Ranch in capable hands, but she would also be taking on a responsibility that extended far beyond any single operation. I want to make one thing clear, she told Dr. Morrison. I'm not interested in imposing cookie-cutter solutions on struggling ranches. Every operation is unique, and the solutions have to be tailored to specific circumstances and communities. That's exactly why we want you, Dr. Morrison replied. Your approach at Silver Creek Ranch wasn't just about implementing new programs. It was about understanding the culture, respecting the traditions, and finding ways to honor the past while building for the future. The announcement of Maya's appointment generated significant attention in the agricultural community. Articles appeared in ranching magazines, agricultural journals, and even mainstream media outlets. The story of the short woman who had revolutionized ranching continued to inspire people far beyond the ranching community. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from her peers at the Silver Creek Ranch. The ranch hands who had once mocked her height now spoke of her with genuine respect and admiration. Buck Morrison, who had been among her harshest critics, was now one of her strongest supporters. She never tried to change us, he told Rebecca Sinclair during one of the documentary interviews. She just helped us become better versions of ourselves. Carlos Valdez, the quiet Mexican cowboy who had become one of Maya's most trusted advisors, put it even more simply. She showed us that tradition and progress could be partners, not enemies. As Maya prepared to leave the Silver Creek Ranch, she spent her final weeks ensuring a smooth transition. The agritourism program was now self-sustaining, with a waiting list of guests that extended months into the future. The educational components had been refined and systematized, making them easy to replicate at other operations. Most importantly, the ranch was profitable and sustainable, no longer dependent on the volatile cattle market for survival. Ezra would remain as the ranch owner, but operational management would pass to Buck Morrison, who had embraced the new model with surprising enthusiasm. The transition represented not just a change in leadership, but a validation of the collaborative approach that had made the transformation possible. You know, Ezra said during Maya's farewell dinner, when I first hired you, I thought I was just getting another ranch hand. I never imagined you'd end up changing everything. I didn't change everything, Maya replied. I just helped everyone see what was already there, the potential for something better. The documentary film crew captured Maya's final day at the ranch, following her as she made her rounds, checking on the cattle, inspecting the facilities, and saying goodbye to the people who had become her family. The contrast between her arrival, a short woman stepping out of a beat-up pickup truck to face mockery and skepticism, and her departure, a respected leader leaving to take on national responsibilities, was stark and powerful. "What do you want your legacy to be?" Rebecca Sinclair asked during the final interview. Maya considered the question as she looked out over the ranch that had become her life's work. "I want people to remember that strength comes in many forms," she said finally. "That true leadership isn't about imposing your will on others, but about helping them discover their own potential, and that sometimes the most important changes come from the most unexpected places." As Maya drove away from the Silver Creek Ranch for the last time as its manager, she carried with her not just the satisfaction of a job well done, but the knowledge that she had helped preserve something precious and important. The ranching way of life would continue, adapted and evolved for modern realities, but still true to its essential character. Her new role would bring new challenges, new opportunities to make a difference, new chances to prove that innovation and tradition could coexist. But she would always carry with her the lessons learned at the Silver Creek Ranch. That true strength wasn't measured in physical stature, that leadership came from service rather than domination, and that the most profound changes often came from the most unexpected sources. The girl who had been laughed at for being too short had become a woman who stood tall among the giants of her industry, not through physical growth, but through the expansion of her vision, her capabilities, and her impact on the world around her. As the Silver Creek Ranch disappeared in her rearview mirror, Maya Rodriguez looked ahead toward a future filled with possibility, carrying with her the unshakable confidence that had been forged in the crucible of challenge and tempered by the satisfaction of meaningful achievement. The laughter had long since faded, replaced by the deeper, more lasting sound of respect, earned through action, vision, and the courage to see strength where others saw only limitation. 3 years into her tenure as Director of Innovation and Sustainability for the National Ranching Association, Maya Rodriguez stood before the largest gathering of ranchers in the organization's history. The Denver Convention Center buzzed with the energy of over 2,000 attendees, representing every state in the Union and several foreign countries. The annual National Ranching Convention had become the premier event for discussing the future of American agriculture, and Maya's keynote address was the most anticipated presentation of the week. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying clearly across the vast auditorium, "5 years ago, I was told I was too short to be a rancher. Today, I stand before you not because I grew taller, but because the industry learned to see strength in unexpected places." The opening drew appreciative chuckles from the audience, but Maya's expression remained serious. She had learned that humor could open doors, but substance was what kept them open. "We gather here today facing the greatest challenge our industry has ever known," she continued. "Not drought, not disease, not market volatility, though we face all of those. Our greatest challenge is irrelevance. We are losing the battle for the hearts and minds of the American people, and if we don't act decisively, we will lose the war for our way of life." The statistics she presented were sobering. In the past decade, over 15,000 family ranches had been sold to developers or abandoned altogether. The average age of American ranchers had climbed to 58, with fewer young people choosing agriculture as a career. Urban populations increasingly viewed ranching as an outdated, environmentally harmful practice that belonged in the past. "But I'm not here to deliver a eulogy," Maya said, her voice growing stronger. "I'm here to share a vision of transformation, adaptation, and renewal. Over the past 3 years, I've had the privilege of working with struggling ranchers across the country, helping them not just survive, but thrive in the modern economy." She clicked to her first slide, showing a map of the United States dotted with green markers. These represent the ranches that have successfully implemented sustainable innovation programs. 147 operations that were facing bankruptcy or forced sale have not only survived, but are now profitable and sustainable. The audience leaned forward, their attention fully captured. Maya had learned to read crowds the same way she read cattle, watching for signs of interest, resistance, or confusion, and adjusting her approach accordingly. "Let me tell you about the Henderson Ranch in Montana," she said, clicking to a photograph of a sprawling operation nestled in a valley between snow-capped peaks. "When I first met Tom Henderson, he was 3 months away from losing land that had been in his family for 5 generations. Cattle prices had crashed, Feed costs had skyrocketed, and he was carrying debt that would have broken most operations. Maya paused, letting the gravity of the situation sink in. Today, the Henderson Ranch is not only debt-free, but has become a model for sustainable grazing practices. They're hosting corporate retreats, educational programs, and research initiatives that generate more revenue than their cattle operation ever did. She moved through case study after case study, each representing a different approach to the same fundamental challenge. The Garcia Ranch in Texas had partnered with a university to develop drought-resistant grazing techniques. The Thompson operation in Nebraska had created a direct-to-consumer beef program that commanded premium prices. The Wilson Ranch in Colorado had become a leader in renewable energy, using wind and solar power to reduce costs and attract environmentally conscious investors. The common thread in all these success stories, Maya explained, is not the specific solution they implemented, but their willingness to see beyond traditional boundaries. They understood that preservation and progress are not opposing forces. They are partners in building a sustainable future. But Maya's presentation was interrupted by a commotion in the back of the auditorium. A group of protesters had somehow gained access to the convention center, and their chants of "Factory farms kill the planet" and "Meat is murder" echoed through the hall. Security moved quickly to remove the protesters, but the damage was done. The energy in the room had shifted, and Maya could see the defensive postures and angry expressions that the interruption had triggered. This was exactly the kind of confrontation that had polarized the agricultural community and its critics for decades. "Wait," Maya said into her microphone, her voice cutting through the commotion. "Let them stay." The security guards paused, looking uncertain. The protesters too seemed surprised by her response. The entire auditorium fell silent, waiting to see what would happen next. "I'd like to invite one of these protesters to join me on stage," Maya continued. "Let's have a conversation instead of a confrontation." After a moment of hesitation, a young woman stepped forward. She appeared to be in her mid-20s, with the earnest intensity of someone who believed deeply in her cause. She approached the stage warily, clearly not sure if this was a trap. "What's your name?" Maya asked as the young woman climbed the steps to the stage. "Jennifer Walsh," she replied, her voice barely audible in the vast space. "Jennifer, you're clearly passionate about environmental issues," Maya said, offering her a second microphone. "Can you tell us what brought you here today?" Jennifer looked out at the sea of faces, many of them hostile, and took a deep breath. "I'm here because I believe that industrial agriculture is destroying our planet," she said, her voice gaining strength. "The meat industry is one of the largest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions, and factory farming practices are cruel to animals and harmful to rural communities." A murmur of anger rippled through the audience, but Maya raised her hand for silence. "Jennifer, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been to a working ranch?" "Well, no," Jennifer admitted, "but I've seen the documentaries, read the studies. I'm not questioning your research," Maya interrupted gently. "But I wonder if you might be willing to learn about a different kind of ranching, the kind that actually helps the environment instead of harming it." For the next 20 minutes, Maya engaged Jennifer in a dialogue that transformed the entire atmosphere of the convention. She explained regenerative grazing practices that actually improved soil health and sequestered carbon. She described ranch operations that provided habitat for wildlife and protected watersheds. She shared data showing that properly managed ranching could be more environmentally beneficial than leaving land untouched. "The problem," Maya explained, "is that we've allowed the worst examples of our industry to define us in the public mind. The factory farms, the feedlots, the operations that prioritize profit over sustainability, they've become the face of American ranching. But they don't represent the majority of us, and they certainly don't represent the future we're building." Jennifer's posture gradually shifted from defensive to curious. "But how do we know which operations are truly sustainable?" she asked. "How do consumers make informed choices?" "That's exactly the right question," Maya replied. "And it's why we need to work together instead of against each other. The environmental movement and the sustainable ranching movement have the same goals. We just haven't been talking to each other." By the end of the exchange, Jennifer had agreed to visit 3 of the ranches in Maya's network, and Maya had committed to developing a certification program that would help consumers identify truly sustainable beef products. The protesters had become participants in a dialogue that pointed toward collaboration rather than confrontation. The audience, which had been hostile and defensive at the beginning of the interruption, gave Maya and Jennifer a standing ovation. The moment had crystallized something important, that the future of ranching lay not in isolating themselves from critics, but in engaging with them and finding common ground. "This is what leadership looks like in the 21st century, Maya said as Jennifer left the stage. "Not the ability to dominate others, but the willingness to find solutions that work for everyone." The rest of Maya's presentation built on this theme. She outlined a vision for American ranching that embraced transparency, sustainability, and community engagement. She proposed partnerships with environmental groups, educational institutions, and urban communities. She described a future where ranchers were seen not as obstacles to environmental progress, but as partners in building a more sustainable food system. "The question before us today," she concluded, "is not whether we can preserve the ranching way of life. The question is whether we're willing to evolve it. Are we willing to be leaders in sustainability rather than followers? Are we willing to engage with our critics rather than dismiss them? Are we willing to see strength in unexpected places, including in the voices of those who challenge us?" The response to Maya's presentation was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, her speech had been uploaded to social media platforms, where it was shared thousands of times. Agricultural publications praised her vision, while environmental groups cautiously expressed interest in the collaborative approach she had outlined. But perhaps the most significant response came from the ranchers themselves. Over the following days, Maya was approached by dozens of ranch owners who wanted to learn more about the sustainable practices she had described. They shared stories of their own struggles with environmental criticism, economic pressure, and the challenge of passing their operations on to the next generation. "You've given us a way forward," said Maria Santos, a rancher from California who had been battling environmental lawsuits for years. "Instead of just defending what we've always done, you're showing us how to do it better." The convention also marked the launch of Maya's most ambitious project yet, the National Sustainable Ranching Initiative. The program would provide technical assistance, financial support, and marketing resources to help ranches transition to more sustainable practices. It would also create a certification system that would help consumers identify products from ranches that met strict environmental and animal welfare standards. "We're not just changing how we ranch," Maya explained to the press conference that followed the convention. "We're changing how the public thinks about ranching. We're showing that American agriculture can be a force for environmental improvement, not just environmental impact." The initiative attracted support from unexpected quarters. Technology companies offered funding for research into precision agriculture and sustainable grazing systems. Environmental groups agreed to participate in the certification process. Even some of the protesters who had disrupted Maya's speech expressed interest in learning more about the program. But the most meaningful support came from the ranching community itself. The National Ranching Association voted unanimously to make the Sustainable Ranching Initiative a cornerstone of their strategic plan. Regional ranching associations across the country committed to promoting the program among their members, and individual ranchers began reaching out to Maya's team, eager to learn how they could transform their own operations. "What Maya has done," said Dr. James Morrison, who had become one of the initiative's strongest academic supporters, is change the conversation from "how do we defend ranching" to "how do we make ranching better?" That shift in perspective is revolutionary. As Maya traveled the country over the following months, visiting ranches and meeting with stakeholders, she was struck by the hunger for change that existed throughout the agricultural community. Ranchers who had been struggling with environmental criticism, economic pressure, and public perception were eager to embrace practices that would address these challenges. The transformation wasn't always easy. Some ranchers struggled with the initial costs of implementing new technologies or changing long-established practices. Others faced resistance from communities that had been skeptical of their operations for years. But Maya's team worked tirelessly to provide support, resources, and encouragement to anyone willing to make the effort. "Change is never comfortable," Maya told a group of ranchers in Idaho who were considering joining the initiative. "But the alternative to change is extinction. We can evolve or we can disappear. Those are our only choices." The success stories began to multiply. Ranches that had implemented sustainable practices reported improved soil health, increased wildlife populations, and reduced operating costs. Several operations that had been facing bankruptcy were able to return to profitability through the diversification strategies Maya's team had helped them develop. More importantly, the public perception of ranching began to shift. Media coverage of the Sustainable Ranching Initiative was generally positive, and environmental groups that had been critical of the industry began to acknowledge the potential for positive change. The confrontational relationship between ranchers and environmentalists was slowly being replaced by a more collaborative approach. 5 years ago, I couldn't have imagined sitting in the same room with environmental activists, said Tom Henderson, the Montana rancher whose operation had been one of Maya's first success stories. Now I'm working with them to develop grazing practices that benefit both my cattle and the local ecosystem. As Maya reflected on her journey from a mocked ranch hand to a national leader in agricultural innovation, she was struck by the continuity of the themes that had shaped her career. The importance of seeing strength in unexpected places, the power of collaboration over confrontation, and the recognition that true leadership came from service rather than domination. These principles had guided her from her first day at the Silver Creek Ranch to her current role on the national stage. The laughter that had once greeted her arrival at the ranch had been replaced by something far more valuable: the respect of peers, the gratitude of communities, and the satisfaction of knowing that her work was making a real difference in the world. The short woman who had been dismissed as inadequate had become a giant in her field, not through physical growth, but through the expansion of her vision and the deepening of her impact. As she prepared for the next phase of her career, Maya carried with her the unshakable confidence that had been forged in the crucible of challenge and tempered by the satisfaction of meaningful achievement. The future of American ranching was brighter because she had been willing to see possibilities where others saw only problems and to build bridges where others saw only barriers. The transformation was far from complete, but the foundation had been laid. The ranching industry had found its voice for the 21st century, and that voice spoke with the wisdom of tradition and the vision of innovation. It was a voice that had learned to see strength in unexpected places, and in doing so, had discovered the power to change the world.